And well, welcome to this new Thursday Talk seminar. As you know, this is a series of seminars with colleagues from other institutions who are working on research fields related to Equality Lab's work. And our aim is to get closer to these researchers and their groups, to exchange our views with them, and to stimulate our collaboration networks. And today, as I mentioned before, we also have with us students from the University of Santiago, students who are working with Sebastian. So welcome you all as well. And before moving on, I want to remind you that we will record the session, and in a few days we will be sharing with you all, so you can take a look again or whatever you want. And today, as you know, we are welcoming Patricia Balvanera. She's a senior researcher from the Institute of Ecosystem Research in Ecosystems and Sustainability from the Universidad Autónoma de Mexico, which is called also UNAM. Hi, Patricia. It's great to see you, and many thanks for joining us today.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a great pleasure to be with all of you, and I'm very happy to be talking to you today. So,
yes, sorry.
Yes.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you, Patricia. Before giving the floor to you, Sebastian wants to say some words as introduction, and I will also introduce yourself to make a brief summary of your curriculum. So, Sebastian, please, I give you the floor if you want to say hello.
Thanks a lot, Manu. Now, just very briefly, because here the most important is Patty's talks. Just to let you know, for those, especially for our students here at the faculty of University of Santiago, that Patty is probably one of the most important leaders in the world working on ecosystem services, on the importance of valuation and how nature is important for our life and for our wealth and quality of life. So please, we are very pleased to have you here with us, Patty. Thanks a lot again. And it's a really great pleasure to have you with us. Thanks a lot. And the floor is yours.
Cannot hear you.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, sorry, Patricia, just a brief summary to all the people who are joining today about your work and experience. Patricia was trained in biology, ethnobotanics, and ecology, and she has been engaging in inter and transdisciplinary research. She has been co-leader of the scientific committee of PECS, the Program for Ecosystem Change and Society, one of the core projects of Future Earth, a global research initiative. And recently, she has been co-chair and lead author of the IP-based Values Guide and the Global Assessment, among other relevant projects. Some of their research interests are transdiscipline, art, cuisine, and sustainable food systems, dynamics of socio-ecological systems, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and human well-being, values of biodiversity and ecosystem services, and successional dynamics of biodiversity functions and services of secondary tropical forests. Today, she will speak about the values of nature, explaining how the way nature is valued in political and economic decisions and how it is an important driver of the biodiversity crisis, but also a vital opportunity to address it. Just a reminder about the structure of this talk. Patricia will give a presentation about 15-20 minutes, and after that we will open a discussion. So feel free to share your comments, questions with us. If you feel, si os sentís más cómodos en hacer las preguntas o los comentarios en español, lo hacemos sin problema. Así que como mejor os sintáis. Y nada, simplemente I want to ask you to switch off your cameras and mute your microphones. And Patricia, that's all. I give you the floor. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm all set. Thank you so much. And let's get started. So I'm going to talk to you about wait, why is it not project? Yes, about the values assessment or the report on the diverse values and valuation for IBES, that is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. The main message from this effort, the 4-year effort, is that the way nature is valued is one of the main drivers of the global biodiversity crisis, but it is also an opportunity to address it. So to explore this, I would like to start with the exploration of how do people value nature. As we all know.
Sorry,
Patricia.
sorry, yes,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you because I thought this was only my problem, but I think we cannot see the slide, the presentation.
Ah,
So if you can.
wait. Okay, I will, let's see what is happening. Okay.
No worries.
A ver. Is it working now?
Yeah, now it is okay.
A ver, let's see. Now that I put in presentation mode, is it working now?
Yes, we can see. For example,
Perfect.
I don't know if someone can write in the chat to confirm that we are all seeing the presentation. Yeah,
We can see
okay.
Well,
Okay.
Patty, but not in presentation mode still.
Ah, what happens? Very strange. Let's see.
You have an icon. Yeah, you can share it again, and you have an icon in the presentation mode down right in the screen.
Yes, I tried that, but let me do something else.
Yeah, no worries.
Is it working now?
Yeah, now it's working. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so just to come back, the main message, no, is the way nature is valued is one of the main drivers of the global biodiversity crisis, but it is also an opportunity to address it. So to start, let's explore how people value nature. As we all know, in over millennia, no, in all these different contexts around the world, people have developed very different ways of understanding and connecting with nature. And this has led to a very large diversity of the values of nature and their contributions to people or ecosystem services. And so the team was faced with a huge challenge of both integrating the very large diversity of conceptualizations among different cultures, but also among different scholarly traditions. And as a result, a novel typology that is inclusive of this very different perspective was developed to help guide decisions about nature. So this typology considers these different layers that we see in the diagram. The outer layer are the different ways in which the world is understood and what kinds of knowledge systems are involved. This affects the broad values that are the societal principles. This in turn affects the specific values, which are the values attributed to nature in a particular specific context. And we've heard about intrinsic, instrumental, and relational values, and we'll come back to this in a second. And this affects what kind of value indicators do we use. And to understand this, we can reflect on the different lenses or lights from or angles from which people relate to nature. So we have used a typology about these different ways to connect on living from, living in, living with, or living as nature. I will emphasize only the two extremes. So if we think about living from nature, of a river, the emphasis, a worldview could be the emphasis on an anthropocentric worldview. The broad values could be the importance of prosperity. The specific values can be the instrumental values, which is nature or the fish in the river as an instrument of our well-being. And so the value indicator could be the amount of fish harvested or the market value of these fish. But in the other extreme, if we think about living as nature, the worldview could be the fact that nature and people are undivisible, and we can think about cosmocentric or biocentric perspectives. And the broad values could be about reciprocity and care. And so the specific values could be, for instance, the relational values. So the values of the relationships between people and nature and among people in the context of nature. And so the value indicators would be, for instance, the presence of these values in rituals or in poems or celebrations. Despite this huge diversity, what we found is that economic and political decisions, and by economic decisions, we mean those decisions that entail private actors, could be corporations or individuals, and political decisions are those that involve governments and that are aimed at taking care of society at large, have prioritized market-based instrumental values. And so these decisions really have ignored non-market instrumental values and also these relational values, as well as the intrinsic values of nature or the values of nature for its own self. Also, conservation policies have, in some cases, downplayed the values of local communities that depend on nature for their livelihoods. So, if there's a huge diversity, how to make this possible, visible? And what we found is that the issue is not the problem, it's not a methodological problem. There are more than 50 different methods already available to assess all these very diverse types of values and worldviews. Actually, in a systematic review, more than 70,000 valuation applications, we found that valuation is being used all over the world, although more prominently in Europe. And we found a large portfolio of methods. And we decided, the team decided to classify these valuation methods based on how the information was gathered. So nature-based valuation are those that consider measuring the state of nature, which are, for example, biodiversity inventories or participatory mapping of nature. Then statement-based valuation are based on what people say about nature and can be contingent valuation or deliberative methods, for instance. We have also behavior-based valuation, which are those that relate to how people behave. So it's about either observing what people do, taking photos, and so on. And then integrated valuation are those tools that put together very different sources of information, for instance, into multi-criteria analysis or scenario building. And for all of these, we have important considerations from the perspective of indigenous and local people, because communities have undertaken an assessment of nature. They don't even call it valuation of their places and their territories for millennia or for hundreds of years or more recently, according to their very own worldview and applying their locally established procedures. We found that, well, the team developed a series of tools that allow to assess the trade-offs in the choice of these methods based on their relevance, which is how these diverse values are elicited in different contexts, how robust these are in terms of how accurate and how they represent different stakeholders, the amount of resources used, and well, the kind of data. So for instance, nature-based valuation can be used in certain contexts. It's quite easy, but doesn't really represent people's values. Maybe integrated valuation can do this a little bit better, and so on. What we also found is that, of course, represented people values, to have this, it's important for stakeholders to participate in the evaluation process. But we found that only 1% of these studies involved stakeholders at every stage of evaluation. Also, the key issue in this evaluation process is how to put together the values of different stakeholder groups. And we discussed that in some cases, like in cost-benefit analysis, you can find ways to compare directly the values at stake. In other cases, as when you do bundles of benefits of nature, you can make them compatible, for instance, through ranking techniques. But in other cases, when, for instance, you are comparing dollar or job values with identity or heritage values, you just need to compare them in parallel. The next question was, okay, so we have the tools, then how to integrate these values of nature in decisions? What we found is that despite this huge amount of valuation efforts, less than 5% of the published studies report uptake in policy decisions. Yet, ignoring, excluding, or marginalizing the values of the local stakeholders often leads to social environmental conflicts because of value clashes. And of course, there's all these power inequities that lead to the undermining the effectiveness of environmental policies. And really the ones that suffer more from this are indigenous peoples and local communities who are directly connected with and depend on nature and often bear a disproportionate burden of changes in nature, but also changes in access to nature. And so the team identified 5 steps through which evaluation process can be tailored to any specific decision-making context to really make sure that the whole process is in response to the needs of the decision-making at stake. Also, evaluation can support policy making at different stages of the policy cycle. So it can be at the stage of agenda setting, at the policy formulation, policy adoption, policy implementation, or policy evaluation. And as you certainly know, there have been very important efforts that emphasize the economic valuation approach that are informing governmental level decisions like the TIB, the Economics of Biodiversity, the United Nations Systems of Economic Accounting, and the inclusive or comprehensive wealth approaches with different trade-offs in terms of relevance, robustness, and resources. And so the issue is that to incorporate explicitly these diverse values of nature, there's a very important filter that is given by the institutions. The institutions we understand as all the informal social conventions and norms and formal legal rules that different societal groups have developed. And all these institutions are underpinned by and support certain values. And these strongly influence whose values count in decisions. And so the issue is to really change from the root how these decisions are taken and to open the possibility for the design, for instance, of policy instruments and policy support tools that are aligned and that are open to this diversity of values in order to really influence decisions towards sustainability. So for instance, we found that tools associated with rights of nature or co-management regimes with communities are really quite open to these different values and have a huge transformational potential. But for instance, payments for ecosystem services, they really depend on how they are designed and implemented, whether they are designed and implemented in alignment with local values, or they tend to impose other values and actually disincentive the previous values. Of course, capacities to undertake these are very important, and the team identified a series of capacities that are critical. For instance, the motivational ones, being motivated and open to listening about these diverse values, analytical in terms of managing this very complex amount of tools, in bridging, so comparing all these values that are hard to consider need to be considered in parallel. For instance, the negotiation tools to identify a common ground, of course, social networking to strengthen the capacities of the different groups, and also capacities to undertake transparent and accountable governance. And in general, we found through so many case studies that more equitable and sustainable policy outcomes can be achieved when these decision-making processes recognize and balance the representation of the diverse values of nature, and when decision-making processes address the social and economic power asymmetries among actors. Beyond this, we really question the development paradigms that are associated with the diverse values of nature. So the different ways in which people conceive nature and a good quality of life, so these worldviews and these broad values, are reflected, no? So in these broad values, and shape how people interact with nature. And so when the broad values are linked to unity, responsibility, stewardship, and justice, they are way more aligned with sustainability. And so we identified a series of future scenarios that in this case are all underpinned by broad values linked to intergenerational justice and biophysical limits. And there are several specific values, no? Like relational values are linked to earth stewardship, intrinsic to nature protection, instrumental values to green economy, and we have other worldviews like living well in harmony with nature, and they can lead to more just and sustainable future as long as they shift away from values that overemphasize the short-term gains and material gains, and rather nurture long-term gains, the group, the community held values, and the benefits of the community, and nurture sustainability values across society. And so it really means about questioning and mobilizing these sustainability aligned values, and it involves empowering civil society and shifting societal structures and institutions. And so, in synthesis, values can be an opportunity to address the nature crisis by addressing 4 leverage points. Leverage points are these places in a complex system, the system of interaction between nature and people, in which a small intervention will have huge impacts. And so we identify 4 value-centered leverage points. The first one is to undertake valuation to recognize these diverse values of nature. The second one would be to embed these diverse values in valuation in a meaningful way. The third one would be to change policies, rights, regulations, so that institutions can be more open to more diverse values, but also shift societal goals and norms and mobilize sustainability aligned values and question the dominant development paradigms. And to do so, the collaborations among the wide range of stakeholders are very important, and there's a role for each kind of stakeholder in society, all the way from intergovernmental organizations to the media. And we identified a series of gaps that I'm not going to go into. So this assessment has several of impacts to date. So of course, as you know, IBES is already undertaking other assessment. There's one on the nexus between biodiversity, food, water, and health, another one on transformative change, and another one to be started soon on biodiversity and business. So this will be important for those. Also, we certainly hope this assessment will be important to the discussion in December at the Biodiversity COP in Montreal to design the post-20, well, finalize the post-2020 biodiversity framework, but also for the implementation of the 2050 vision for biodiversity and the agenda for sustainable development. But also, we do hope, and we have already been some reactions, that this assessment be of use to social actors such as women, youth, and indigenous people in local communities to promote their role in transformative changes. And to date, we have had a huge response in terms of millions of people connecting in Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so on, downloading the reports, notes in the media, but also we have very quick reactions from the House of Commons in the UK and the US Department of State. Just to finish, I would like to speak quickly to how this assessment was produced. It was a 4-year project process with 3 meetings, one online. We had the COVID pandemic, so it was really challenging. We really emphasized the importance of engaging with indigenous and local knowledge with 3 workshops, 1 online, and a very strong emphasis on these groups making direct contributions to the text and to the shaping of the key questions. We have, as a team, reviewed more than 50,000 documents in depth from at least 200,000 pieces of evidence considered. And well, here is the great team. Anto is here with us. He was also part of the team. And we had 95 experts from 37 countries making a huge amount of contribution of their voluntary time. It was a pleasure to be one of the co-chairs of this effort, and we had a fantastic technical support unit based in Mexico and a management committee that helped guide our work. And well, the summary for policymakers is already published, as well as the full chapters are already available. Also, the methodological details are also available. And so we just hope you have some time to look at this, and I'm more than happy to respond to your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm seeing my camera is working. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Patricia, for sharing your exciting work at IPBES assessment. It's been a great pleasure for us. And now it's time for sharing comments, questions, or ideas. So turn on your cameras if you wish, or write your questions in the chat in English or in Spanish. And yeah, I don't know if someone can make some comments. Please feel free to talk or raise your hand. Is joining?
I have one
Yes,
question.
yes, Sebastian. Sorry.
Oh, please, Jill, you were first. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia, for your very interesting talk. I'm really fascinated to hear about your work. The IPBS conceptual framework is something that I'm very interested in working with. And having worked with it in a couple of studies, I'm really keen to understand more about how to integrate, for example, I'm coming from a very Western perspective. How is a Western academic to integrate knowledges from other parts of the world into our work? I mean, I understand the process of perhaps collaborating with colleagues in different parts of the world, but do you have any specific advice for being able to access Indigenous local knowledge and how to work more effectively with these different kinds of knowledge in this area?
Yes, this is a very important question. Thank you very much, Gillian. So we were faced, no, with these challenges over the 4 years, and what I have been involved in international collaborations for a long time, and I think it's not so easy because, like, Western science tends to be quite dominant, no, and this dominance is not necessarily very clearly acknowledged. We kind of give this dominance for granted or don't even question it. So one very important thing was that eBest by construction have these very international teams. So this was very important. But of course, on the day-to-day interaction, people have very different conditions, no? Many authors from Africa didn't have internet or power cuts, and so it was really hard to meet. So there are all these logistic issues. And so we tried to have very different modes of interaction. Some people are interacting when speaking, but of course those who are not fluent in English have a hard time. Those other people communicate better in writing. So I guess we are still dissecting the lessons learned of how much we were able to fully integrate this, even if it was our really very important aim for us, and what were the important tools. In terms of the indigenous and local knowledge, I think the very important issue was to have indigenous knowledge holders in the team. And Anto can maybe reflect a bit more about this, because two of these authors were in the chapter he worked with. And they really made us aware of how we tend to trivialize indigenous and local knowledge. And those of us trained in science were really not so aware of the way they conceive the world. So I think this is a long way to go in terms of being way more respectful, no, of these very different ways of thinking about the world and to thinking about science and knowledge too.
Thank you.
Should I answer some of the questions, or maybe you want to expand, Anto, or?
Hi, guys. No, I think you did pretty well. That's one of the biggest challenges of our chapter, was to actually acknowledge that the way that we try to capture indigenous knowledge is actually not possible. And there was a huge debate in bringing that very important piece of information to the chapter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think you did explain perfectly. Thank you, Patty.
Okay, so I wanted to answer some of these questions already in the chat. So Sebastian asked about younger generations. Well, I would argue that this assessment is particularly relevant to young generations, because today, on the one hand, we have many young people who are really very concerned about the environmental crisis, and have all this depression or anxiety and so on about this. On the other, we also have people in the young generation that are completely disconnected with nature. And so I think this assessment is very important for them, because on the one hand, I think it really allows people to connect, to see our connections to nature from very different perspectives, and to really have a very wide overview of the very different ways in which we connect to nature and how to do it, but also it provides a pathway. It really speaks to these values that we seem to have lost in the last generation, maybe a few decades, that are these very deep societal values of care, responsibility, justice, reciprocity. And we really think that the voices of many of the youth leaders are very much in tune with what we are showing here. Also, we have a question about the barrier, about the 5% only incorporated in policy making. So there are several things. On the one hand, academic research is sometimes very disconnected to actual decision making. On the other hand, there were some important barriers in terms of very different timelines and very different needs. So academia has very different, all these methods may take very long, while decisions need to be taken very quickly. And there are also issues of legitimacy and credibility. So that's why the 5 steps approach we propose is to really design from the very start of the decision-making process a process that will incorporate valuation in the process, and to think about all these stages all the way from agenda setting to monitoring the impacts of a policy. I have another question about how to incorporate knowledge, a process that people, So these valuation processes are totally designed for people to understand. So when we use a method, for instance, the statement-based valuation, it's about talking to people. It's about talking in their own perspective. And you have all these methods in which people just talk about what are their perception or concerns. But also, even if you do an ecosystem services mapping, you can also, it's really a very important tool that has been shown to be very useful to people, that people understand these maps. You don't need to explain the very complex technical process that is underneath. And the issue of the incorporation of local knowledge, this is a very important issue that was highlighted by the process, is that we tend to assume that any technical team, be it scientists or consultants, just drop into a community and they make interviews and that's it. That's how you incorporate the knowledge. But what we found, and that's exactly the previous question, is that this doesn't really make justice to how people think. So there are other tools that really allow people with very diverse worldviews to be part of the decision-making processes, no? And to really participate in the whole design. And there are fantastic examples of co-management in which the discussions and the explicit incorporation of these views have been really important from their design, their implementation, and along the different steps.
Well, I don't know if are there some comments or questions. Yeah, we have another question from Milena.
Sure.
I don't know if you can read, Patty. Yes.
Yes, I can see it now. Sure. So the perceptions, so if you remember this diagram where you have the different circles, the way people perceive nature is not independent of the worldviews of people and their broad values. And so that is why we went all the way to considering these worldviews. So for instance, if you are in a city and you don't have a direct contact with nature, and you buy your food from the grocery store, and you don't really have access to any information, both intellectual but also experiential information about where your food comes from and so on, you probably have a worldview that is very disconnected with nature, right? And maybe not even have a view of how is nature providing all the food that you can buy in the store, or that nature is really regulating the temperature of the place you are, and providing the oxygen and so on. And so thinking about these worldviews and these values, broad values, really lead to understanding the perceptions and the values associated to these perceptions. If you think about someone every day working in the land, living in a place where, for instance, they have to relate to a very diverse tropical rainforest with a lot of challenges, no, in terms of um, dangerous species, but also this huge diversity overwhelming all your senses. You tend to develop, and depending on your cultural background, you have a very different worldview of what is your role in this place and how nature is connected to you, and what are your societal values in relation. And of course, this will affect your perception. So in a way, the perception is one part of these values, and we capture these perceptions in, for instance, these statement-based valuations where people express their perceptions. And we have another question. Thank you very much for all your questions. I'm very happy to engage in this conversation. So are there any plans to integrate in findings from IBES evaluation into school or other educational programs? So, I mean, this is a very important point, but this is where we come to the role of all societal actors. In IBES, for this particular assessment, there were already 95 experts from 45 countries working really hard for 4 years. And we did our job. And the assessment is out there, fully available, no need to pay anything, online. So now it's for the whole society to take this on. You know, I really think it's very important in this environmental crisis that each and every one of us identify what is our role in addressing this challenge. And if our role is to be a teacher, then maybe as a teacher, as a school teacher, it's really hard to connect to these very dense documents. But maybe as a developer of educational materials, we can identify all these connections, no? So there's all these other roles of society to develop materials for NGOs, for indigenous leaders, for education, for the media, for, you know, there's so much work to be done. But I think it's very comfortable to think that it will be IBES's responsibility. But it's very important to understand that IBES's mandate is to produce this assessment, and it's really there for all the different actors of society to pick it up. Okay, so.
There are 2 more questions here.
Yes, I have more questions. Thank you. So, Sebastian.
Huh? Yeah, too many questions for you, right? Because
no,
this is brilliant.
No.
Conversation.
It's
Thanks
fun.
a lot.
It's
Very
not.
inspiring.
Thanks for your questions. So Yes, I think, Sebastian, I mean, that's certainly a very important question, no? Of what are the opportunities for the Global South? So what we found is that indeed, either countries that had more financial resources, more technical resources, were the ones that apply valuation more often. And Anto, I think, is wanting to also say more about this. But also, we found that those countries where biodiversity is being threatened were also applying these valuation tools. And my reading, my very personal reading of this is that, of course, those countries get funding to do this. So the challenge is what happens in the global south. No, we certainly need valuation in the global south. We don't have, in many cases, neither the financial nor the technical resources. And also, we do not have the political willingness to do so. So there's many levels and many challenges. I think on the one hand, we definitely see a very important role for academia to develop ways to do this, to really bring this assessment down to very different realities, and to develop also method. I mean, the methodologies, there's millions of them, but maybe how can these methodologies be amenable to the different contexts and to really be respectful of the needs of the different stakeholders? There's a huge amount of work to be done also with NGOs that, in particular, for instance, indigenous and local groups are very interested, no, in bringing these tools to fight for their territories. But also, I mean, there's a huge agenda in terms of connecting to governments, so they are much more sensitive, and they know, I mean, they see the conflicts every day, but what kind of tools are amenable for them to address this, no? So this is a huge thing. But maybe, Anto, you want to expand on this point.
No, I think you did again pretty well. Just I think that there is, I mean, if we rethink and reflect a little bit on the effect of scientific colonialism on of this socio-ecological science colonialism, as we see on almost every day on papers, it is just a matter of not only in understanding new ways of connecting people or understanding the disconnection to nature, but also understanding that that type of assessment and value has to be performed from a bottom-up, I would say, approach, which sometimes cannot be done from the global north. Easy. But yeah, but I guess the policy domain and the policy context is one of the most important things. Yeah.
Yes, I think, I mean, there's so many different contexts. And this gets me to the next question, which is, you know, in very different political contexts, the way to address the issues are very different. So, for instance, in Western democracies, it feels to, in a way, that the talking to different people already and the listening to these diverse values is somehow already part of the deal. And you have many countries in Europe, for instance, that have a very interesting ways to consult people for any different decisions and make their values visible. So for them, they were very interested, and they would be able to incorporate quite easily these methods. But then you have many countries in which the government really doesn't have neither the willingness nor the technical skills to do this, and where it's really the role of civil society to push, and that's where the role of leaders, no, not only indigenous leaders, is so important, because many governments would tend to ignore or suppress these values. So we think that having this document with very important guidelines, and that was approved and signed. Of course, it's not ¿cómo se dice? It's not a document that leads to agreements and to actual implementation. It's not a binding document, but it was still approved by 139 countries. So having this document is very important for many of these groups as a support in their fight through different legal and different mechanisms. No? So there's a question about local ecological knowledge of fissures in Philippines and Italy, and how this could be integrated into decision making. And yes, so I think if you look, for example, just about this 5-step approach, where you have a very clear identification of the different steps, all the way from putting a policy process in which you have the willingness to incorporate these diverse values, and then setting together, convening all the different stakeholders and setting the agenda, and together identifying the different methods and analyzing the data, and together really communicating about this and designing the policy or implementing the policy is very important. And also we provide very nice examples of the successful implementation of, for instance, community arrangements or different policies to respect the rights of nature and the rights of communities. So I think you can navigate the documents by going into the summary for policymaker, and then you could go to the different chapters, no, for more information. I'm going to try to take another one. Thank you, Jim-Lea. So I think, Jim-Lea, you wanted to respond maybe to my response?
Thank you very much, Miss Patricia, for your response. And that for me is very inspirational and motivational. And give me more like reasons to pursue the study that I'm doing. Thank you.
Yes, I think we all in the world today, we all need inspiration and hope. And I think it is very important to provide the tools of how to think about the opportunities for a better world, which I think it only depends on each and every one of us, and to really undertake these changes. And each of us can only contribute with a very small part, no, during a PhD or a master's degree or an undergrad thesis. But if we're all working together in the same direction, or it's more or less a direction, but of course, every context, every place will define what are the directions that are best suited, no, to each context and to each team. But I think as much as we connect and we join our efforts, I think we can go along making these changes. And I'm going to take this final question, I guess, which is about improving the way that people connect with nature can be one solution. Absolutely. We found very consistently that if we think about futures that are more desirable, they're definitely very linked to a better connection with nature, a respect, and also to other people, in the context of nature, but also no, that's what we found. The dominance of these very narrow market values are about a total disconnection with nature. So, and we found at very many different places in the assessment that this connection with nature is really the core. So I think that's really the beauty of the values assessment. It goes way beyond the indicator, the methods. It goes all the way to the very deeply held values and the very deep connections with nature. And working from there is the deepest leverage point. It's going to take time, but it's also the one that we think is going to retrieve the most important changes through to take us in pathways towards more just and sustainable futures. This was a very nice question to close. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Patricia. Sebastian, I don't know if you want to say something before
No, just
closing
well,
this.
thanks a lot for Patty for your precious time, brilliant presentation, and even more amazing response to all of these well, very interesting questions that the public tried to share with you. Thanks a lot again, and well, hopefully within the lab here we can inspire by this very important assessment, as you said, for our for a better nature and people in the world, right? Thanks a lot again.
Well, thank you very much. It was very, very nice to talk to all of you. And yes, we're really looking forward to having people just be excited about this and use whatever you think is useful and to trigger discussions and questionings. As we said, the most important leverage point is to question our deepest assumptions of where we are and why we're doing things, and to work from there. So we're very happy that you were able to listen to this work, and there's so much more just in the SPM and in the whatever 600 pages of all the wonderful work. So how much time you have available and what are your interests, there's so much opportunities for you to just to dig in as far as you need to.
Well, thank you so much, Patty, for sharing your time with us. And well, see you in the future and keep in touch.
Yes, good luck to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.